Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Inquire Live at Gameday Central alongside Jeff McLane. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from SoFi Stadium as we get set for the Eagles' Week 14 matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers. Jeff, how you doing?
Great, Olivia. Happy to be back here, SoFi Stadium, for the third straight season. This will be the first time we see the Eagles play against the Chargers. Last time the Eagles were Southern California to play the LA Chargers. They played actually down in the soccer stadium for, I think it was LA Galaxy. And there was only 22,000 fans there, and the majority of them were Eagles fans. In fact, Philip Rivers had to use a silent count in that game, and that was a memorable win for the Eagles. Really kind of wore down that Chargers team late in the game with how they ran the ball, and of course, what that team ended up doing on the way. So we'll see if the Eagles can turn things around here, but it's good to be back and good to have the game to write and talk about.
It's a little less of an intimate setting here at SoFi Stadium compared to that soccer stadium. However, I would venture to say that it's probably going to be majority Eagles fans, or at least close to it, in the stadium today. But we'll find out in just a little bit as we get closer and closer to the start of the game. All right, just a reminder, everyone, before we get into our conversation, we always want you to be a part of it. You can head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Game Day if you're not already over there. You can leave us a question, a comment down in the chat. We'd love to answer some of those throughout our show today. Also, if you're over on X, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you are on social media right now, you can leave us a comment or a question in the chat as well. And like I said, we want to hear from you, want you to get involved, and we will answer some of your questions throughout our show. So let's get into some of the latest headlines going into today's game, Jeff. All eyes right now are on Justin Herbert, as he is expected to start in today's game after injuring his non-throwing hand last week against the Las Vegas Raiders. He underwent surgery on Monday, and now he's expected to start. He may have some limitations. I think the big question surrounding Herbert in this game is, what is he going to be able to do and what isn't he going to be able to do? We saw last week as he finished out the rest of that game that he wasn't able to line up under center. He was only able to hand off the ball with his non-injured hand, his right hand. And also just keep in mind, too, that Herbert dropped back only 20 times against the Raiders, which is tied for the third lowest total of his career. So I would expect to see some different things that the Chargers are going to try to do. My guess is they're going to want to try to hand the ball off as much as they possibly can. But what are your thoughts on how Herbert's injury is going to impact today's game?
Yeah, so he's officially active. We just got the inactive list for both the Eagles, Chargers, and to no surprise, Justin Herbert will be starting. The question that you mentioned is, like, how much can he do? And if they'll use some of Trey Lance, his backup, in certain kind of under center, short yardage situations, or maybe even kind of a QB run game. I spoke to one Eagles player who thought that was what he thought was going to happen. The Eagles spent the past week preparing for both quarterbacks, and the possibility that you could see that kind of split between the two, especially when it comes to those under center, short yardage plays, because it's going to be hard for Justin Herbert to grip the ball with his left hand. I was just watching him out here with that glove. It's almost like he can't bend his fingers, and he's just using it. He can't bend his fingers, and he's just using it as kind of just to hold the football in place. In fact, I was telling you the story before. I was staying at the hotel that the Chargers stay at, and I just had to bump into Herbert, and I saw him walking, and I was kind of like looking at it. He had some sort of like strap on his hand, and I'm looking at it the whole time he's walking, and he's probably realizing, who's this weirdo kind of like staring at me. And then before he went behind the curtain, he kind of looked back, and who was this guy? Anyway, that's my not much of a point to that story, but other just to say that Herbert clearly, obviously, is not going to be 100%. And if there's no under center for him in those circumstances, if it's shotgun, a little more pistol, it really takes one variable away from the Eagles defense to have to worry about, versus when he is under center and you bring in play action and all that into the equation of what the defense is thinking. So we'll see what he can do. Obviously, when he's healthy, he's one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. He can fit a lot of throws in the tight windows. And despite the fact that they've been without both tackles now for an extended period, he still managed to get this team to 8-4.
Well, Justin Herbert is going to be limited. The Eagles defense is also going to be limited in a way without Jalen Carter, who is inactive for today's game after he underwent procedures to both shoulders shoulder injuries that he has been nursing all season, dating back to the offseason. And I think you can tell throughout the season, Jeff, that he has been limited, impacted by these shoulder injuries to some extent. And I think it culminated last week when he played a season low 70% of the defensive snaps. He just hasn't really been himself. Still, for the most part, has been playing a pretty high volume of the snaps this year, 85% of the defensive snaps overall. But I think his absence, of course, is going to impact this Eagles defense. But how do you feel like Vic Fangio is going to approach his game plan this week without Jalen Carter?
Well, look, we'll see more of Jomo, more of Jordan Davis, a little more of Byron Young. I think there's an opportunity for some of the ends to kind of slide in on pass rush situations. So Jalen Phillips has done it before. He can do that. We've seen Brandon Graham do it over his career. He's already done it a few times this season, although he hasn't been effective for the most part since he's come out of retirement. But he can kind of, with his size and his strength, he can match up against those big guards. And we know one of the big guards for the Chargers offensive line, Kai Becton, was last year. But this is not a great offensive line. I already mentioned the fact that they're down both tackles, but they're also not very strong up the middle. Bradley Bozeman, I think, is one of the kind of lesser centers in the league, and Mekhi Becton has been really up and down this season. Not playing with an offensive line, at least last year's offensive line with the Eagles, as strong, has kind of exposed some of his liabilities in pass coverage and quite frankly as a run blocker. So there's the opportunity there for the Eagles offensive line, certainly, as I mentioned, the flanks for the edge rusher to kind of get pressure on Justin Herbert. He's got to be thinking about that hand. You're going to want to hit him. You see a guy that's not at 100%, has an obvious injury, you're going to probably try and go after it. So we'll see how the Eagles pass rush does here, but this is an opportunity for them. They can't get it done here in terms of getting pressure on the quarterback. I don't know when they will.
Absolutely. It's a huge day for the Eagles pass rush, and it's really a huge rebound game for the Eagles defense, especially after having a really porous performance. Nice alliteration there, impressing myself mid-sentence against the Chicago Bears and their rushing attack led by DeAndre Swift, old friend of the Eagles. The Bears as a complete unit, they racked up a total of 281 rushing yards. So it was a really dominant performance on the ground. The Bears were able to get their offense going and build their play action game off of that run game. Like I mentioned earlier, it's going to be interesting to see how much the Chargers lean into the run game given Justin Herbert's injury. If they want to hand off the ball a little bit more often, that was the formula to their success last week against the Raiders. The Chargers had 192 rushing yards against the Raiders last week. And that was without their rookie running back in Omarion Hampton, who is poised to make his return in today's game. He's been out for the last several weeks, went down in week 5. And before he was injured, he was averaging 4.8 yards per carry. So he was doing pretty well there for the Chargers. When you look at how this Eagles defense has kind of lapsed over the last several weeks, we talked a lot about Nakobe Dean and kind of the infusion of life that he brought to this Eagles run defense since his return. We've seen them tail off a little bit over the last few weeks. What is the key for them to tightening up on the ground once again?
Yeah, I guess it's just kind of tighten things up. It sounds pretty simple, but obviously, clearly, it was not last week. I thought last week they went into the game with not prepared for what the Bears were going to do, which is to do a lot of outside zone run, cutbacks, kind of slant in terms of the blocking. And now they did adjust, and there was a middle part of that game over 5 series when I think the Bears only had 50 yards total and didn't score a point. But by the fourth quarter, just having been on the field for so long, they wore down, and that's why you saw a lot of those kind of backbreaking runs from the Bears running backs. Now, I don't want to make any excuses for the run defense, but I think, given the way that they had performed over a large majority of the previous month or so, I'm more inclined to see them have a better outing today. I would be concerned, though, in getting Hampton back. This is a guy, not a lot of a sample in terms of rookie and how much he's done this year. You mentioned the 4.8 yards, but if you look at his numbers a little closely, 4.1 yards after contact this season. That's like amazing. And, and it hasn't really hurt them as much, the fact, what they have on the offensive line, the lack of blocking, because this guy can break tackles. It's really hard to bring down. He's strong. He's agile too. It just isn't just like strength with him. And I think the same thing could be said for the other guy, Kamani Vidal, a very good running back in terms of picking up yards after contact. I think he averages 3.4 yards after contact. So it's not going to be easy. And as you mentioned with Justin Herbert's injury, but also with just the way Jim Harbaugh calls the game, he's going to want to establish the run. And I think other teams have shown that you can run the ball on the Eagles, and kind of been up and down. And I know Nakobe Dean, as you mentioned, has been better. They're going to have success. In terms of what they need to do to prevent that, this is an 11-man deal. Everybody has to kind of be in the right gap, know their responsibility, do their job. It's kind of a little simple thing in that regard. And then it's going to be on Vic Fangio in terms of what they do schematically, because sometimes you're going to have to take a guy from the back end and help in the box. And we've seen over the years Fangio, a lot like on the other side of the ball, the Chargers defensive coordinator, Justin Minter, will take away from the box because they want to do so much to prevent explosive plays through the ground.
Well, let's flip it over to the other side of the ball for the Eagles, Jeff. The Eagles are still, week after week, it feels like we're having the same conversation. They're still looking to achieve a sense of consistency all around, both in the run game and in the pass game. And as you reported earlier this week, Nick Sirianni has been more involved in the Eagles' offensive preparations, stepping in to help Kevin Patullo a little bit more as they try to get things back on track as they finish out the season and head into the playoffs. The big question on offense going into today's game is what is going to be different? What can be different? What can be done in the last several weeks of the season that can try to bring some life and bring a spark to this offense so late in the game at this point? One wrinkle I know we've been talking about quite a bit, just really all season, going into the season, you did a whole podcast episode on this, Jeff, was the quarterback run game, the designed run game in particular, and whether or not we would see Jalen Hurts start to tail off a little bit more in the number of designed runs he would have. And that has been the case so far this season, as he is in his fifth year as the full-time starter for this Eagles team, after averaging 3.6 designed runs per game in the first 4 years of his career. He's averaging just over one designed carry per game now this season in year 5. If Hurts is able to, if that is one of the things that they decide to do in going forward, is to try to get Hurts to run the ball a little bit more frequently, how do you see that potentially opening things up for the rest of the run game and Saquon Barkley, who has also been having a tough time just like the rest of the offense this season?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start with the design run thing. I'd heard, and it's kind of why I've been focused on it since the offseason. It's something that Jalen probably don't want to do as much of because of the injuries and obviously this stage in his career. You've seen it before. A lot of quarterbacks that are mobile, as they get older, it just becomes something that they can't do as much of, and they don't want to do as much of. And I think the Eagles were on board with that. We saw what happened last season against the Commanders when he suffered a concussion. We saw what happened 2 years prior against the Bears. On a zone read keep, he got tackled to the ground there and hurt his shoulder. So for the most part of his career, Jalen Hurts has done a very good job of avoiding injury. But when he's had 2 of 3 injuries in December over his career, 2 have come when he's been running the ball. Okay, but that being said, no one's asking him to carry it an abundant amount of time when it comes to the design run. I think you just need maybe like 3 or 4 per game to keep the defense honest, especially on these zone read RPO type plays, so that they know that there's an option for him to keep and run, and that in turn will open things up because they have to defend all 11 versus just 10 if he's handing off to Saquon Barkley all the time. And that should, free Barkley up a little bit. We'll see how much of it they do. I think it's kind of like, we're at the stage of the season where it's like kind of all hands on deck. Everyone's got to do their part. And with Jalen, I think he wants to do whatever it takes to win. And they've gotten to 8-4 despite not running as much. But the offense at this point, they need as much as they can get. As you mentioned, that I reported the other day, among others, is that Nick Sirianni did get involved in the offense coming off the mini bye. Definitely more vocal during the meetings. From what I understand, he's definitely more in terms of the game planning. Not that he didn't in the first place, but at this point, something as I mentioned has to happen. I think it's going to look not significantly different, but I think you'll see more zone. Obviously, we mentioned quarterback runs. Not zone. More motion, more pre-snap motion. I think you'll see a little more diversity in the calls. I'm sure some of you at home are wondering why did we have to wait until week 14 for all of this to happen? I don't know quite the answer to that. I think there are a lot of myriad reasons why, and it involves both the head coach and the offensive coordinator, and the quarterback, and all the way down. But at this point, will change in terms of the quality of the offense they put out there. I'm not quite so sure about that.
This isn't going to be an easy game for the Eagles offense to rebound in, just given the quality of the opponent. And especially when you look at this Chargers secondary, this group is ranked second in the league in passing yards and in passing touchdowns. However, if you look a little bit closely into some of the numbers here, the Chargers have allowed a 72.3% completion percentage and 8 touchdowns between the numbers. That 72.3% completion percentage is below the NFL average, and they've been much tighter outside of the numbers. And you kind of look at what the Eagles offense likes to do, where Jalen Hurts likes to throw the ball, and it's more or less the opposite. He has been he's known to target outside his receivers outside the numbers. They don't usually exploit the middle of the field so often, Hurts, but he has been pretty good at it when he does. Hurts has targeted receivers between the numbers on just 46.8% of his attempts. When he doesn't, he's effective. He's pretty effective too. So it's just something that the Eagles are probably thinking about potentially as well. I guess the big question that I have, Jeff, is why isn't Hurts throwing between the numbers as much as the potential, the opportunity may be there? And do you expect to see more of that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we've seen over his career. I think size has something to do with it. He's 6'1". I think seeing the field sometimes is why he doesn't throw in between the numbers, and sometimes, and some of it I think is just the offense and the scheme, and not allowing him to do that as much. We've talked about this plenty of times here about the lack of crossing routes, dig routes. It's a lot of hitches. It's a lot of stuff as you mentioned outside the numbers, and that's where they score. I mean, a lot of times, and that's how they're productive. Is Jalen throwing to his top receivers, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith on the outside and over the top, and he throws a great deep ball. So, that'll take away from some of those middle field throws. Also, the intermediate length throws have been way down this year. He's been productive when they do it. They also don't do a lot of play action under center play action throws. We did see it briefly during the Vikings game and the Giants game, and they were effective in doing so. I don't think they were as effective at doing it against the Packers, and that's why we've seen less of it. But that's a top 5 defense. I think they need to get back to doing that. I think we may see a little more of that here today. Of course, it's hard to do it if you're not going to be successful in the run. We've talked about that. It sounds like a broken record here. They got to get the run game going to kind of open these things up. And this is a really good defense. Probably not quite the Packers' quality in terms of the personnel, but Jesse Minter has a really interesting scheme here. He will give up runs. He will give up yards on the ground. So the Eagles have an opportunity, I think, especially if they get these guys in the nickel. And the Eagles got to do that by having 3 wide receivers on the field, not 2 tight ends, and no more of Grant Calcaterra blocking defensive ends 1-1, I hope. I understand sometimes the plays, play out not the way you predicted, but they need to put their guys in the best situation possible to thrive. And I think if we do that more with getting 3 receivers on the field, and I know Jahan Dotson hasn't been great either, but I think that'll help Saquon Barkley in this run offense. And then when you got to get in the manageable third down situations, because if you are third and 6 and plus yards, then that opens up more than what they can do. And they like to go dime. They sometimes even have 7 defensive backs on the field, and they're zone heavy. They're not going to give you a lot of man, and this is stuff the Eagles have struggled. They're not going to give a lot of balls over the top. I think in terms of explosive plays, I think they may be first in the NFL in that regard, and keeping offenses from attacking them that way. So it's going to be tough. But to beat this team, they got to start doing some of the things to beat the Chargers team, become more productive on offense. They needed to start doing some of the things that maybe they don't think they can excel at, but they just got to kind of go to it. They just can't just sit there and just say, okay, we're going to kind of rely on what won us a Super Bowl last year. That ain't working. Let's try and find a new formula that perhaps can work 5 games left in the season.
Well, Jeff, with everything in mind, we've discussed a lot of these players that we're going to be keeping an eye on in today's game. However, if there was one specifically that you are most intrigued by in terms of how they're going to perform, who would it be?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the run game and Saquon Barkley. sometimes when we get to this point, we focus on players that maybe we hadn't talked about yet. But with Barkley, I know there's been a lot of clamoring for more Tank Bigsby based upon what he's done when he's gotten the ball. To me, the sample's really small. I don't think we need more of him than Barkley. Maybe a few more carries here and there. They only had one play last week. They had both backs on the field, and they ran kind of an RPO off of it. Barkley didn't see the ball coming to him, and it was, the Bears totally got a read on it. But Barkley, look at his numbers, 3.7 yards per carry versus 5.8 last year. Not good. And if you look at the yards after contact, he's at 2.7 this year versus 3.4. Okay, not good, but not horrible, right? Not that much different than the year before. But if you look at kind of like more of a metric for how the offensive line is blocking, yards before contact this year is 1.42 versus last year 2.17. To me, that kind of explains why maybe Barkley's yards after contact or his yards in general just aren't as good in terms of the stacked box rate. He is seeing that at a much larger rate, 31.8% of the time is he seeing a stacked box versus last season 20.6. Something has to do with the Eagles constantly insisting on going with 2 and 3 tight end sets so that the defense will match them that way. But they were successful running out of nickel last year. I don't know why we haven't seen as much of it. I think we will see it in this game.
Mm-hmm. Also, it certainly doesn't help that Lane Johnson hasn't been active over the last couple of weeks. He's inactive once again today, but this has been a season-wide issue. This isn't just limited to these last couple of games. All right, I'm going to pick a player on the other side of the ball for my player to watch. I'm very curious to see how Marcus Epps fares in what is expected to be his first start in place of, Sidney Brown last week, who got his first start in place of Andrew Mukuba, who is injured and is no longer in the picture for the Eagles, at least for now. So we've got Epps likely potentially starting here for the Eagles. And it's going to be his first start since week 3 last season when he was a member of the Las Vegas Raiders. He sustained a season-ending injury last year when he tore his ACL in that week 3 game. So now we've got Epps, who is fresh off of injured reserve too. He's been quite a bit banged up over this past year as he was out there. He was out for the last month with a shoulder injury. So he's going to get likely an extended look in today's game, and we'll see how he fares. I'm very curious to see how he performs. He has a lot of experience, as Eagles fans may know. They may recall him from his last stint with the team. He was a starter on the 2022 team that went to the Super Bowl and fell to the Kansas City Chiefs. So he's got a lot of experience to bring alongside Reed Blankenship to go up against this Chargers passing attack, which has been very successful with Justin Herbert at the helm. So Epps is someone who I'll be certainly watching out there and seeing how he fares throughout the game. And I think this will be an interesting test to see if he is going to be the long-term starter now with Mukuba out of the picture and Sidney Brown kind of being a question mark right now in terms of his future with the Eagles, but certainly someone Epps to keep an eye on in today's game. All right, Jeff, let us head over now to the final segment of our show, the predictions. We've had a number of predictions go well, some not so well this over this season. This Eagles team can be hard to get a pulse on at times. However, what is your final score for today's game?
You don't have to say it. You've been much better at picking games than I have. But I've never been good at it. And I think in this game, I hate for Eagles fans that have to deal with me picking them again because I'll probably be wrong. But I'm going with the Eagles because I just don't think this Herbert thing, not playing it less than 100% is going to be good for them, especially when you have the offensive line issues that they have at the tackle position. And that's going to be a key, though, for the Eagles, as I mentioned before. Jalen Phillips, who came out really hot with the Eagles in his first 2 games, hasn't really had many pressures. I think he's still playing well. He's obviously done a very good job against the run for the most part last week. But hey, let's see it. This is the guy you traded for. Let's see you get pressure against against 2 backup tackles, or at least on his when he's rushing a backup right tackle. Alex Hunt, who I think's had a nice season, and Nolan Smith when he's been back, he's gotten pressure as well. But if you look at this group, the edge rusher group, they have a total 9.5 sacks. Which isn't bad. It's fine. I know sacks aren't in everything, but the guy they let walk in free agency has 11, Josh Sweat. So that's just a little bit of comparison there. If I'm the Eagles, though, Offense, I'm worried about one guy in particular, Derwin James, a couple guys, but in terms of, maybe the chess piece guy that I'm worried most about is Derwin James. He's labeled a safety, but he plays everywhere. He'll play in the slot. He'll play almost kind of like a quasi linebacker spot. He'll drop. He's kind of like their Swiss Army knife. They're kind of like the Malcolm Jenkins role that the Eagles, that he played for the Eagles for so many years. So you never know quite where he'll be, and that will kind of mess with in terms of your personnel and what you want to do in terms of play calling. And then the other guys I'm worried about on the Eagles offense, it's their edge rushers, Khalil Mack and Tuli Tuipulotu. You may remember that last name, or recall that last name. That is Marlon's younger brother. These are really good edge rushers. Khalil Mack has been doing it a long time. He missed some time to injury, but it seems like he's healthy. He's the guy I'd be most concerned about. They both they split sides in terms of where they line up, but mostly it'll be over right tackle Fred Johnson. And Fred, as you mentioned before, in for Lane Johnson. Fred's done great. It's in terms of backup, you have to respect what he's done over these last few years, but he's had some struggles over these last few weeks, and I think that's a guy that if I'm the Chargers, I'm going to attack. All that being said, I think that this is kind of like backs up against the wall. Eagles have to kind of turn this around. They still have talent. I think the defense, I'm not as worried about them. I am obviously concerned about the offense, but they can still find a way as long as they keep turnovers down to win this game against, again, a unit that's really banged up. I also like Jalen Hurts indoors. As we mentioned at the top, they've played well here before, 2-0, different team, but I'm going to give them a slight edge and have them winning 25-19. Odd score, but
pretty funky score. I like a funky score. Fabulous. I've got a less funky score, but I do have an undesirable finish here for the Eagles. I've got Chargers winning 30-27, which may be a little bit generous if Justin Herbert is indeed limited by this hand issue he's got to his non-throwing hand. But that said, when I was sitting down to do this prediction earlier in the week, and I was kind of looking at where some of the Chargers' strengths were and how some of their games have been trending over the last couple of weeks, I kind of got a little glimpses of potential Bears 2.0 situation. And I think maybe that is the worst possible outcome for this Eagles team, in that the Chargers would be able to run the ball with great success once again this week if Herbert isn't completely 100% able to do everything that they want him to do in the offense. And then the Eagles, on the other hand, continue on this downward trajectory against the run, which I think is probably unlikely. I would think that this past week was sort of a one-off for Vic Fangio's defense. However, I don't know. I think my bigger concerns probably lie with the Eagles and the offense right now, as they do with you, Jeff, just in terms of their ability to kind of get themselves together through this at this point of the season. Some of the just the matchups in different areas, I think, could potentially be an issue, especially on third down. The Eagles have had a really hard time on third down this year. They've converted just 34.5% of their third down attempts, which ranks 28th in the league. They really cannot afford to fall behind the sticks in this game, simply because the Chargers will make them pay. Eagles have had a lot of negative plays, a lot of penalties that have pushed them back, and the Chargers, they rank third in the league right now, with 16 sacks on third down. So that's to me, that was something that was a little bit frightening, and that's really been an issue for the Eagles all season long. Is negative plays, shooting themselves in the foot, penalties. So I'm a little bit hesitant to think that this is the ideal condition right now, this game, this opponent, for the Eagles to have to rebound. On the other hand, I find it hard to believe that the Eagles would lose 3 straight games for the first time since 2023. But right now, I've kind of got to pick the Eagles as they are and not what I think they could be. And, we say a lot of the time, oh, they've got all this talent, and they do have a lot of talent, and they should be better than a lot of these teams that they played against this season, and they haven't always been. So the Eagles have shown us what they are right now, and I'm going to believe them. And because of that, I'm going to pick the Chargers 30-27 final score. We'll see how it all plays out. All right, everyone, that is going to do it for us. Thank you so much for joining us here at Inquire Live at Gameday Central. Just a reminder, you can head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Game Day. During the game, we will be chatting with you live and in real time. So we look forward to seeing you over there in just a little bit.
And if you want even more Eagles insight, please check out my podcast, Uncovering Birds. where I take you behind the scenes each week with exclusive reporting, interviews, and everything you might have missed. It's your Eagles. You can listen to Uncovering the Birds at inquirer.com/podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you next time.